What's up, guys? Welcome back to The Right Side. Today, I want to take a deep dive into left-wing ideology and why it is destined for failure. The left is an all-encompassing term in a way that the right isn't. The left could refer to classical liberals who identify as left of center or go as far as being communist. Left-wing ideology, no matter its starting point, has a simple yet authoritarian logical progression to the most radical extreme solutions. At its very nature, left-wing ideology believes it's the state's role to eliminate the barriers in front of the individual so they can realize their true potential. They believe that man doesn't consent to being part of a society and thus becomes a victim of it, warranting the state to intervene and correct the transgressions against the individual that society posits to them. If you don't believe or agree with me, just look at how progressives treat or view criminals as victims of society, or how communists view the individual as an inherent victim of wage slavery in the free market system, as if labor is not necessary to survive in reality. The left obsesses over victimhood, lecturing everyone on intersectionality and how being victimized transcends time and space in different dimensions. Because, of course, a poor white boy in Appalachia couldn't be as victimized as a disabled black transgender. The left thrives on victimhood status originating from the existence of society altogether, as if participation in a society is a choice at all. What the left doesn't understand is that humans, man, are social creatures. We are not made to be kept to ourselves. We need social interaction, however small. It's because of this that society happens to exist. It would be like blaming marriage for men and women naturally coming together to form families. Men and women aren't forced against their will to enter into the concept of marriage. Nature takes its course and brings the sexes together. These societal structures are naturally occurring. Although naturally occurring, these social structures have negative side effects because humans aren't perfect. We all have a sinful nature and self-interest that contradict our neighbors. What's good for some may not be what's good for all. These are things that we must accept as individuals living in a society. But the left doesn't believe we have to accept them. The left believes that because we are born into society, we have every right to have the state step in and correct the negative externalities involved in having a society. That because human beings are equal, we cannot vary so much in individual ability that it causes disparities and inequities between individuals. Human beings all have equal inherent value. However, we are all born with unique gifts or talents. Nature bestows her gifts unequally. This inequality in talent leads to some being CEOs and others being shelf stockers. And it would be a mistake to label one as more inherently valuable than the other. The atheistic streak inherent in left-wing ideology causes them to worship individualism and material standards. The left wing comes off as very attractive because of their belief that every person, being equal, should have an equal path to success. They posit the right as being against this notion as if the right doesn't constantly champion equality of opportunity. Where the left wing goes wrong is their belief that these disparities caused by unequal talents aren't, in fact, naturally occurring, but instead a tool by well-off capitalists or the wealthy elite to keep their place in the socioeconomic class and keep the poor and less fortunate under their thumb. This foundational principle warrants the state's intervention in the assets of the rich and its redistribution of economic resources to the lower class to finally give them a fair shot. This is why the left wing quickly becomes collectivist. The purpose of socialism is to cycle economic resources from the top back to the bottom as a corrective measure for greed and power. The reason why these measures never seem to be enough is because of the natural principle of disparate capabilities. Socialism always punishes those who work hard because they assume them to be taking advantage of those deemed by society to be failing. This motive for correction assumes two things simultaneously. One, that, as previously mentioned, this disparity and inequality can't be born from naturally occurring disparate talents and abilities inherent in the individual, and two, that the state knows the criteria of what is considered successful, and that's what it looks like when an individual is deemed to be failing in a standard of living or life. This naturally drives the left wing to be highly assumptive of what humans ought to have and want. An interesting observation of this ideology shows that the left wing doesn't believe that a lower standard of living could ever be a condition in which humans would be content to live. Looking at the poor and those in poverty as inherent victims, assuming that no person would ever be content in those conditions. This, of course, is very classist, believing that a certain class is of lesser value based on their material possessions. They look at poverty and the poor with disgust and empathy, like giving an overweight individual unsolicited nutrition, fitness advice, or instruction based on the assumption that they don't want to be in their current condition. This observation of the left wing opens the door to how their ideology becomes so authoritarian. The left's diagnosis of the rich and wealthy upper class as being ultra greedy would be funny if it didn't lead to the hatred of economic success. The left paints CEOs and hedge fund managers as greedy devils. This line of thinking is naive at best and dishonest at worst. To anyone on the fence, hear this. Are the CEOs and hedge fund managers the only ones who are greedy in the world? Are you a perfect angel immune from greed? No. We are all driven by greed. The push to deny basic human nature is deeply frustrating and troubling, especially when we have countless historical examples demonstrating these simple concepts. The left desperately works to separate themselves from what they perceive to be the traits that are destroying society. It is the ultimate form of projection. They hate that from time to time they feel greedy or selfish, but instead of acknowledging these innate drives and working to correct them, they deny their feelings and lash out at those who have succeeded while exhibiting the same imperfections as them. The farthest extent of the left wing is an expectation that everyone wants what you do. This is precisely what drives the left to wield such extreme state power and what underlines their attractiveness. If I want nice things, that means that other people must want those exact same nice things. So my inability to have those nice things means that me and my neighbor are victims of society, and thus we must stand together and overthrow those I deem to be successful. They posit themselves as fighting for those who may or may not feel like a victim, and if they don't, it's because they aren't smart enough or educated enough to realize that they are, and thus I act on their behalf. It sounds like I made quite a bit of logical assumptions, and it's because they do. You see this materialize in racial politics. In theory, black conservatives contradict everything that the American left stands to fight for. A historically marginalized individual who doesn't accept the label of being a racial victim and believes that they have the equal path to success as everyone else. How does the left treat these black conservatives? Racism. Black conservatives are race traitors, Uncle Toms, and self-hating. They are turning their backs on their own people. If the right said these things to black liberals, they'd be called racist white supremacists. The left assumes black people to be victims and unable to do for themselves, just like viewing the poor as victims and under the thumb of capitalism. The left's desire for everyone to be equal in their life drives them to demonize success and infantilize failure. If you start a company and grow to large profits, well, it's because you took advantage of and exploited your workers' labor. Or if you're still a sole proprietor, you were benefiting from the privilege you had during your upbringing. Or if you didn't come from wealth and privilege, you are turning your back on your community and want those that they associate you with to starve, suffer, beg, and die. You see how every one of their solutions or prescriptions inherently posits a winner and loser, success and failure, or an oppressor and oppressed. This all goes back to their foundational assumption that the individual is an inherent victim of society because the individual never gives clear consent to be part of a society. They are grandfathered in. This is why the left wing sympathizes with criminals. In their eyes, criminals are the ultimate victims of society. An individual who suffers to the point of immorality because they are oppressed by a society that they didn't choose to be a part of. Criminals are either desperate victims of society who steal in order to feed their starving families, or evil members of the bourgeoisie who break the law to shore up their spot at the top. Intersectionality allows the left wing to compete in the oppression Olympics. Sure, a black man is a default victim of the societal systems, but not nearly as much as black women. But even black women couldn't ever comprehend the oppression that black transgenders experience. With the left wing, empathy towards the oppressed causes a race to the bottom. Unless you are worshiping the lowest victim of possible oppression, you are not considered an ally of them and are villainized for contributing to their oppression. This happens with gender ideology, economic status, and racial identity. To them, unless you accept the most radical form of oppression possible, you are racist, transphobic, and hate the poor. They shame and chastise you for not accepting their framing of society. This race to the bottom is the practice of virtue signaling. Posting a black square and flying the pride flag are symbols of conformity to the agenda and the cause. Any stands outside of the binary oppressor and oppressed worldview is villainized, and the member is shunned from the group. A tight conformity to an ideology at the risk of being ostracized and outcasted by the group is a cult. By threatening any dissenters to the ideology as racist, transphobic, privileged, sexist, and the like, the left wing operates like a cult. This practice of virtue signaling perpetuates the sickening act of using the despair of others to soothe yourself as being moral and virtuous by portraying empathy and compassion for the downtrodden. The left wing uses the suffering of others as an opportunity to demonstrate their moral superiority over others. Instead of, for example, being content with their relationship with God in private, they must project a faux sense of morality to the outside world so they can be accepted and reaffirmed. The tragic part of virtue signaling is that it poisons any legitimate attempt to actually help the downtrodden. Charity used to be a quiet and private way for a society to help the less fortunate. But now the left wing doesn't use charity, but instead highlights their care for the downtrodden as a moral substitute. What makes this very attractive to lazy left-wingers is that empathy and compassion are free. It costs nothing to post a black square or fly the pride flag. They are, at the end of the day, empty acts of performative virtue meant to show your conformity to the group and receive validation for your virtuous actions and support for the downtrodden. The left wing becomes highly radical in its approach and violent against its opposition because it views history as linear rather than cyclical. To the left wing, human history is a linear progression of technology, education, and equality. Under this view, we are always getting closer to achieving full equality, peace, and the maximum fulfillment of the individual. Progressives, socialists, and communists all believe that we are on the precipice of making every individual in society equal and enacting justice perfectly. If we could only guarantee healthcare to everyone, shred the population of firearms, nationalize the economy to eradicate capitalist greed, make higher education free, guarantee parental leave and equal pay, and accept all the immigrants seeking better life, and do all of that through the state under the authority of the government gun, then everything would be solved and their ignorant opposition would finally see the light and admit their failures. These are some pretty high stakes, and by positing these radical reforms as the only solution to the suffering of the oppressed class, it makes sense that these measures would be pursued with the utmost urgency. This is why the left wing is highly contradictory in its profession of tolerance to the other side, despite overt public demonstrations of hatred for the other side. This is why communists thirst for capitalist blood. This is also why communists and some socialists loathe liberals. In the eyes of communists, the only way to implement the master plan of state solutions is through a violent revolution from the oppressed class, overthrowing the oppressive bourgeoisie. Liberals, however, don't want to see class tensions escalate to that point, but still agree with the necessity of state intervention. So they implement a moderate agenda designed to ease class tensions, thus taking the wind out of the sails of the communist revolutionary spirit. Funny enough, corporations and big business love the left for two main reasons. For one, the left's radicalism in terms of culture enables corporations and big businesses to satiate the crowd with pride-themed corporate logos and stay on their good side. On the other hand, all of the left's economic policies cause regulatory capture, which protects the likes of Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, etc. So, while policies like the minimum wage or stronger unions should in theory scare the big economic players, they know that they can pay for the added regulatory burden unlike their smaller competitors. The small mom-and-pop shops reinforce localism and keeps communities intact, but the Walmart supercenters and anti-small business tax structure and employment policies secure their demise. The term Walmart economy didn't come out of nowhere. Where mom-and-pop shops bring an air of familiarity, trust, and good faith into the local community, Walmarts often give off the sense of being cold, corporate, and void of life, providing goods at razor-thin margins that starve local businesses. This is also in part why it will take a true revolution from the perspective of the left to change the system. Big businesses and corporations can co-opt left-wing policies through liberalism and some socialist policies to keep their power and stifle competition. The left wing doesn't accept a concrete, constant state of human nature. Instead, human nature is taught through nurturing. Humans turn to evil out of a reaction to suffering that is the result of society. Men and women are really the same, but are taught to do different things. Everyone wants the same thing, but a hierarchical society prevents them from realizing their potential. Where the right wing accepts human nature as fixed influences, liberals accept human nature as a suggestion, and progressives, socialists, and communists accept human nature as lines drawn in the sand by the powerful elite as a tool for propaganda that can be erased and recreated like an etch-a-sketch. The unwillingness to recognize that the natural, disparate, and unequal distributions of talents and gifts, coupled with our innate human nature as human beings, leading to disparate outcomes and inequality, is a foundational failure of left-wing ideology, and thus, all other floors built from that foundation are fundamentally flawed. Left-wing ideology's first step is the assumption of victimhood for what conservatives view as the unfairness of life and the product of living in a society. The right views this unfairness as just that, unfair, and often unjust, but something you must come to terms with and grow stronger because of. The left doesn't view this unfairness as natural because they don't assume that society is a constant, and thus, being put into society victimizes the individual. The unfairness shouldn't be accepted and dealt with at the individual level because the individual is unjustly forced into societal participation and membership. Left-wing ideology is hyper-individualistic in this manner. It posits that the ultimate goal is the realization of the individual's desires and passions without restraint. But being free to become addicted to illicit substances is no freedom at all. And this is why left-wing ideology leads to widespread societal decay and destruction. Discipline and self-control are freedom. Restraint enables freedom. Addicts are not free. They are slaves to their dependence. Without restraint and moderation, we are nothing more than slaves to our impulses. This liberal society is nothing less than anarchy, where no one has any duty or obligation to their neighbor or community. The right believes strongly in the individual and their capacity to do good and improve. But the left places the utmost value in the individual's ability to realize their potential and desires freely, as long as they align with their arbitrary moral standard, that is. The right's social conservatism is not shackles on the individual meant to keep them captive from living their life. They are akin to the steel cables that support a bridge. The right recognizes that behaviors and tendencies inherent in human nature drive an individual to self-destruction. Since we are not creatures of isolation, the effect of this self-destruction reaches beyond the individual and impacts their family and community. Thus, society needs barriers to restrict the individual from engaging in these self-destructive behaviors so that the individual and their surrounding communities can flourish. Left-wing ideology is an ideology of death. The ideology's strict priority to the needs and whims of the individual enables eugenic practices like abortion. The ideology's absolute moral certainty validates violence against our evil opponents. Just look at the lethal communist revolutions throughout history. The left wing doesn't bring prosperity. It comes to prominence in reaction to prosperity and the guilt they feel for succeeding. In the end, left-wing ideology comes from a noble and honorable aspiration to see others succeed. However, its foundational principles are based on false and flawed premises. The left wing breeds disingenuous virtue signaling and fosters a tight adherence to the ideology's agenda, the functions of a cult. The left wing simplifies the human existence into a binary worldview of oppressed and oppressor that incentivizes its members to worship the suffering of perceived victims and incentivizes the members themselves to highlight any source of perceived oppression, whether it be being a woman, a minority, or other sexual orientation, or a combination of those. Their foundational principle that man is inherently a victim of society due to their non-consensual membership lays the groundwork for pervasive and widespread perceived victimhood and oppression status. The reality is that humans need each other, and we could not function as individuals without society. Society is a constant across species. All types of creatures naturally join together to form societies. We are designed to be social creatures. Using the state to correct nature is nothing more than pushing against the wall. The harder you push, the harder it pushes against you. We must adapt to the wall and work to live with it while managing its effects. Nature is unrelenting and unforgiving. Nature doesn't bend to your will because you believe something with absolute certainty. Left wing fights against nature at its own peril. And that's exactly why it's destined to fail. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. If you'd like to support and help the channel grow, please subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with all my uploads. Finally, whether you agree or disagree, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I look forward to engaging with you guys in respectful and thoughtful discussions. With that said, I'll see you guys next video. See ya.